Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a special partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Sunday, November 27th, 2022. And if you'd like additional information on top of what I provide during this program, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. And all you have to do is put your mouse on there and point and click, and it'll pull up a forecast with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories for anywhere in the country. Great way to check up on what the weather is like for family and friends in different locations. Quick check of the map. Continental U.S. The main noted features are there is a scattering of winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories across the interior Pacific Northwest down into areas of the Rockies Mountains of Utah, Colorado. Otherwise, pretty typical for what we'd expect after Thanksgiving and as we approach the month of December. Here in Alaska, though, winter weather advisories are in effect from Bristol Bay and also Kuskokwim Bay area, east and southward through Kodiak Island, and that will be especially as we go through tonight and into Monday afternoon. There'll be several inches of snow possible, the heaviest snow falling along areas from, say, Togiak on over through Dillingham and then across toward Kodiak City. Large Arctic high pressure will be building southeastward into the Yukon Territory, and it's going to bring widespread sub-zero temperatures across the interior. Some areas could be down in the 30s to around 40 below come Tuesday morning. High winds are going to develop as a result of that strong Arctic high and a relatively deep area of low pressure that's going to be passing just south of Haida Gwaii. And as a result, we expect high winds, especially there around Juneau, Skagway, as well as Valdez and up through Thompson Pass. But we are going to be seeing warmer air just kind of build and develop over the Bering Sea, and some of that mild air will spread eastward along the west coast beginning midweek, Wednesday into Thursday. In the meantime, Fort Yukon sitting at 2 below at 2 o'clock this Sunday afternoon, looking for low temperatures come at least Monday morning to easily be into the 20s below zero, and then potentially near 40 below come Tuesday morning. Dillingham is going to see the snow develop. Looking south of there on this particular airport webcam, you can see the lowering cloud off to the south. That's the moisture coming up with a frontal system, so the snow will be developing there this evening and overnight. And then further east, bright blue sky at Valdez, but winds are going to pick up out of the northeast, could gust at times 60 to 70 miles an hour, especially in through the mountains. And then Juneau also pending some Taku winds to develop as we go into Monday night and through the day on Tuesday. So here are the current advisories and warnings. We have a winter weather advisory for the areas of Dillingham east through Kodiak, and also now it was also added the area along Kuskokwim Bay. It could pick up a few inches of snow as well. This is all coming as we go through tonight and into Monday morning and afternoon as the low slides eastward into the Gulf and North Pacific. Otherwise, high wind watch is in effect for Valdez, and we expect winds there to become quite gusty as we go through Monday afternoon and evening and be at their strongest later Monday night and Tuesday. Same thing, Juneau. We're anticipating there that there be high winds, a high wind warning. The watch has been upgraded to a high wind warning, and strongest winds will come late Monday night through the day Tuesday. Some winds could gust up around and even over 70 miles an hour. So you know the drill. When you have those kind of winds, there could be some tree damage, minor property damage. Also could lead to some power outages and could make driving difficult with those strong gusty winds tugging at the wheel. All right, looking at the satellite imagery, you can see a curl in the clouds, one area low pressure out and through the Bering, frontal system pushing east through the eastern Aleutians. It'll riding up the Alaska Peninsula, and eventually the secondary low will develop there out over the southeast corner of the Bering and then cross the Alaska Peninsula tomorrow. And that same low will end up heading eastward toward near and south of Haida Gwaii by Tuesday. And high pressure up there to the north along the North Slope, eastern Brooks Range will continue to further strengthen now into Monday as it drops southeastward into the central Yukon Territory and rises above 1050 millibars. So looking at the satellite, or I should say looking at the surface maps, there's that frontal system creeping up through the eastern Aleutians with snow ahead of it as the warm air rides in up over the colder temperatures that are near the surface. And then the big high taking shape there in the northern parts of the state. And later tonight, that high begins to shift east toward the northeastern part of the state, Alcan border. The low takes shape, a secondary low there just west of the Alaska Peninsula. And on Monday, that low works its way east and southeast of Kodiak Island as the high continues to develop and build a bit more into the central Yukon Territory. Meanwhile, back out toward the Russian Kamchatka coast, there's low pressure and warmer air is going to be continuing to ride northward up through the Bering Sea, so that by Tuesday, this shows the scenario. You have a 1052 high over the Yukon Territory, a 978 low just south of Haida Gwaii. Very strong winds there across the Panhandle. And then further west, we have mild temperatures, areas of lighter rain, fog out over the Bering Sea, and that milder air will begin to press inland across the west side of the state by midweek. So low temperatures could be 18 below there at Glen Allen Monday morning. Teens, upper teens there in northern Panhandle. Monday afternoon stays below zero there in the Copper River Basin. Highs struggling to get much into the 20s there in portions of the Panhandle. Only 18 and Anchorage. And then look at Tuesday morning. Could be 30 below there at Glen Allen. And then areas of the teens, even with strong winds, 13 there at Skagway and Juneau. And Tuesday afternoon, we expect highs to remain sub-zero in the Copper River Basin, only around 8 above in Anchorage. And going to the far north, we have lows in the teens and 20s below, with some readings approaching 30 below around Arctic Village and Yukon Flats. Monday afternoon, look for widespread sub-zero temperatures. And then Tuesday morning could approach 30s and even 40 below there, like what it's forecast for Fort Yukon. And daytime highs on Tuesday will struggle to get much above the teens and 20 below in areas of the east central, whereas along the west coast, notice Savunga at 33 as some milder air begins to push in from the southwest, and lower 20s along the Seward Peninsula. Monday morning, we'll see sub-zero readings as you ride up the Yukon and upper Kuskokwim river basins, but teens along the coast. Lower 40s there at the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. You get Cold Pass down through Dutch Harbor. And then Monday afternoon, we expect some highs that could be up near 50 at Dutch Harbor. And temperatures colder there as you go up the Yukon River, only near zero. Tuesday morning lows, McGrath 20 below the interior of the southwest, likely below zero, but still above freezing as you ride out along the tip of the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians. And high temperatures Tuesday afternoon will be near zero as you ride up the Yukon River up toward Anvik, and certainly as you get further up toward Galena, but highs in the 40s there at the tip of the Alaska Peninsula and extending out along the Aleutian chain. Most notably, 6 to 10 day temperature outlook December 3rd through the 7th. Likelihood of much above normal temperatures western part of the state, centered on Norton Sound down through Bethel into the Kuskokwim, YK deltas. I could see much above normal temperatures with cooler temperatures there through the Panhandle, and precipitation will average above normal north and west of the Alaska Range throughout the Yukon Valley into the far north up through the North Slope, and below normal precipitation in the southeast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's check out your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned early this week, Monday morning, there could be a pocket of IFR conditions there through the Yukon Flats as a big Arctic high continues to build southeastward into the Yukon Territory with strong temperature inversion and some trapped moisture and pollutants, creating some ice fog there. Otherwise, widespread IFR conditions out through the lower Bering, extending through the eastern Aleutians and creeping up the Alaska Peninsula. And we have an area of snow, lower ceilings and visibilities across the southwestern coast, Bristol Bay down into the northern half of the Alaska Peninsula as low pressure and a frontal system work its way across the Alaska Peninsula. That feature will be passing just south and east of Kodiak Island as we go through Monday afternoon and evening. And then on Tuesday morning, widespread VFR conditions across much of the mainland, but very cold. Some low temperatures are going to be around 30 below up there through the Yukon Flats along the Alcan border. As the high pressure that'll settle into the Yukon territory will build upwards around 1050 millibars. This is really going to increase the winds across the Panhandle on Tuesday. And back out through the Bering, widespread IFR conditions from St. Lawrence Island down through the Aleutians. Tuesday afternoon, we still see quite a bit of VFR conditions there across the mainland, but as I mentioned, the bigger concern will be the turbulence associated with some of the stronger gap winds between that very strong Arctic high and the Yukon territory and low pressure just off of the Panhandle and Haida Gwaii coast. Meanwhile, back to the west, warmer air streaming northward up across the Bering Sea, going to create widespread IFR conditions as there will be areas of fog, a little lighter precipitation, and extensive low cloudiness. And at Tuvik Pass, we'll see VFR conditions with that Arctic high in place to the east. Adigan Pass as well, VFR. Now, Lake Clark's going to get clipped on Monday by some of that moisture with that Alaska Peninsula low crossing that area. So expect IFR conditions to develop at Lake Clark for a time. Mara, a little further north, should become MVFR. And then as you go further north along the Alaska range, expect VFR conditions from Rainy eastward through Windy Pass, Isabel, and Mentasta. Though again, we're going to start to see areas there down through the Copper River Basin, the coastal mountains along the Gulf Coast, especially northern, northeastern Gulf Coast, northern Panhandle. Winds are going to be picking up, especially Monday evening into Tuesday. Tanita Pass, VFR, Portage Pass, VFR. Chilkoot and White, also VFR conditions, but with those winds building by Monday evening and especially into Tuesday. Looking at freezing levels, they do bump up to about 8 to 10,000 feet there and through the central Alaska Peninsula. There's that little ridge of warmer air associated with the low pressure and frontal system. Otherwise, cold air well entrenched across much of the mainland. As I mentioned, some areas will be getting down around or even colder than 30 below up there through the central eastern interior and areas along the Alcan border. Greatest threat for icing Monday will be along areas of the southwest, including Dillingham, Bristol Bay, above 2,000 feet. Further south, above 8,000 feet, where there's that little wedge of warmer air working its way east. Upper level jet stream winds will be strongest above the Panhandle and British Columbia coast out of the northwest, 125 to 135 knot jet max. We have another jet max out in the Pacific, not as strong, coming into the western Aleutians, 110 to 115 knots from the southwest. 9,000 feet, 700 millibars. Ridge of high pressure extends from the Chukchi Sea down into the lower central Bering Sea. And out over the Gulf, we have winds generally out of the west-northwest, 50, 60 knots. And then back out over the western Bering, winds anywhere from 45 to 60 knots from the southwest. That will facilitate a pulling in of warmer air there across the Bering Sea in the early portion of the week. 3,000 feet, low pressure situated there just to the east-southeast of Kodiak Island, and some stronger winds coming in off the Alaska Peninsula and out into the lower Gulf North Pacific interface, 40 to as high as 55 knots. And of concern, turbulence. So we're going to have that Arctic high pressure strengthening. Now this is the position of the high and the Gulf low on Monday afternoon, but as we go through time, that high is going to sink a little further south, build to 1050 millibars, while the low tracks eastward to the lower southwestern Panhandle coast and Haida Gwaii. So that's really going to get those gap winds going Monday evening into Tuesday. There are high wind watches for places like Thompson Pass, Valdez, as well as Juneau, Skagway. Could see some very strong winds there, especially Monday night, Tuesday. Now, during the day on Monday, the strongest winds and turbulence will be along the Alaska Peninsula, surface to 4,000 feet.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the Earth and grows our food. While the Sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the Sun doesn't stay at the Sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the Sun, radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the Sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the Sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. This is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane about 30, 45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the Sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the Sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy. And then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I as a human being can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system's going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. And the sea ice, well, it's really developed here in the colder weather we've seen here the past week. Rather extensive across the Arctic coast, and also expanding in there through the Chukchi Sea down through Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sounds, as well as into areas of the west, southwest coast, including the Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas. The ice, though, will continue to develop a bit further here for maybe a day or two more, but we're going to see a push of milder temperatures, milder air work its way up along the west coast and through the Bering Strait as we get through the middle and latter part of this upcoming week, with an overall trend for above normal temperatures over the Bering Sea and the west side of the state by next weekend. Let's look, though, at the inner channels here of the Panhandle on Monday. Stronger winds will be developing by evening. During the daytime, 35-knot north gales, Lynn Canal, 7-foot waves. The outer coast, 25 to 30-knot northeast winds, Gustavus up through and west of Yakutat, waves about 9 feet. But the stronger winds will be developing thanks to a very strong high pressure settling into the Yukon territory above 1050 millibars, and a low pressure that'll be passing west and just south of Haida Gwaii. Strongest winds come late Monday night through Tuesday. We could see 45 knot sustained winds with fully developed seas there and through some of the inner channels. Gusting as high as 60 knots, Lynn Canal, 45 knots down there toward Ketchikan, Metlakatla. In the outer coast, look for offshore winds northwest, 40-45 knot gales. Again, waves as high as 18 feet there off of Sitka. And then for Monday, the northwestern Gulf, north winds Prince William Sound, 20 knots, waves 3 feet. And we can see northeast winds down the length of Cook Inlet, as much as 30 knots there toward the entrance with 7-foot waves. For Tuesday, north to northeasterly winds continue, upwards of 30 knots off the Kenai coast, off of Cordova, out over the northwestern Gulf, and out of Cook Inlet, with waves running 6 to 7 feet. For Kodiak Island on Monday, other than dealing with some accumulating snow as well, where there is a winter weather advisory in effect. Shelikof Strait northeast winds 30 knots, 7-foot waves. Winds are going to turn more southwesterly as you get south of Kodiak Island through Sandpoint at 20 to 25 knots, waves 8 to 9 feet. East winds out of Bristol Bay at 30 knots and waves of 6 feet because we have a low pressure that'll be crossing the peninsula and then pushing east of Kodiak Island. For Tuesday, on the backside of that trailing low, north winds 25 knots, Shelikof Strait, 5-foot waves. And as you go out the length of the Alaska Peninsula, winds will turn back toward the southeast around Sandpoint, Cold Bay at 20 knots, waves running 5 to 6 feet. The Aleutians, eastern Aleutians, generally west-southwest winds 15 knots. They try to turn back toward the southeast, Atka through Adak at 15 knots. Waves generally running 8-9 feet on the North Pacific side and 5 to 6 feet on the Bering side. And then for Tuesday, the bulk of the Aleutians, the central eastern Aleutians, will see southeasterly winds of 25 knots, waves anywhere from 7 to 13 feet on the North Pacific side and 6 to 8 feet on the Bering side. Offshore flow along the southwest coast, northeast winds out of Norton Sound 20 knots with ice in place. East winds off of the Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas 25 to 30 knots. Waves generally running about 9 to 12 feet. And then on Tuesday, east winds 15 knots out of Norton Sound with the ice there in place. Winds will begin to turn a little more southeast and southerly at around 25 knots. Waves generally running from 5 to 8 feet in the areas north and then west and southwest of Nunavik Island. Along the Arctic coast, southwest winds of 20 knots. Waves not really there because of the extensive ice. Lower Chukchi Sea, look for east winds 15 knots out of Kotzebue Sound, turning around to the south off of Point Hope. And then southwesterly along the northwest coast, waves running a few feet. 30-knot east winds out of the western Seward Peninsula with 12-foot waves there on the north side of St. Lawrence. And then on Tuesday, look for southwesterly winds along the Arctic coast with the ice there in place, but winds increasing 30 to 35 knots across the Chukchi Sea from the south with waves of 7 to 10 feet and waves of 8 feet on the north side of Nunavik Island. So Monday, low pressure will be east of Kodiak Island, traveling along the Gulf North Pacific interface, strengthening as it slides just south of Haida Gwaii on Tuesday as a big 1052 high centered over the central Yukon really cranks up the winds over the panhandle. Thanks for watching, everyone.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.